Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Jon Stallworthy Poetry Prize award event for 2023. It's an absolute delight to see you here in person and to know that we're going to hear the poets themselves reading their works to us directly. It's a completely different experience from the online version, although there will in fact be a YouTube video on the Wolfson website after the event, and so not only will you be able to revisit the occasion, but please do tell your friends and relations who might like to hear about it. So my name is Julie Curtis. For many years, as a Fellow of Wolfson College, I had the pleasure and the privilege of knowing Jon Stallworthy right up until his death in 2014. He was a dear friend and a colleague to many of us, a distinguished academic, professor of English, the author of many books, including studies of W.B. Yeats, Wilfred Owen, and Louis MacNeice, the editor of important anthologies of English literature, an occasional translator of Russian poetry, which is my subject, and above all, he was a wonderful poet in his own right, with 7 volumes to his name. He was also infinitely interested in the writing of others, nurtured many young talents. He was a generous reader of and commenter on other people's manuscripts, and I certainly benefited from his very generous reading. After Jon Stallworthy's untimely death in 2014, the then president of Wolfson College, Professor Dame Hermione Lee, set up the Jon Stallworthy Poetry Prize to honour his memory as a poet and as a much valued fellow of the college. With the kind approval of the family of Jon Stallworthy's close friend, the poet Seamus Heaney, a fund in the English faculty which was associated with Heaney was combined with other funding to establish the prize. And we're delighted that since then, fundraising efforts and generous donations have now secured the endowment of the prize in perpetuity. This prize gives an opportunity for Oxford postgraduate students to submit their work in an annual competition to run alongside Oxford Newdigate Prize, which is open only to undergraduate members of the university. Each poet may submit for our competition up to 3 poems, not more than 40 lines in length. And the prize is hosted and run by Wolfson College and administered by the English faculty at Oxford. The theme chosen for the first 2016 Jon Stallworthy Poetry Prize was borrowed from the title of one of Seamus Heaney's collections, Seeing Things. In 2017, the theme was Leaves. Since then, we've had poems written on the themes of stealing, vestiges, plastic, scrolls. Last year it was sleep cycles, and this year the judges proposed the topic of disgrace, with a faint echo of Liz Truss in the background. Each year the shortlisted poems are published in a booklet as a small print-run edition. I can show you that later on, and indeed I have some copies for the poets to take away with them today of the previous competitions. If you wish to read them, you can find them in the English Faculty Library as well as in Wolfson Library. Since its inception, one of the competition's judges has been the poet and professor of English, Bernard O'Donoghue, who's here tonight. His first fellow judge was Simon Armitage, now followed by Alice Oswald, both holders of the title of Professor of Poetry at the University of Oxford. Alice Oswald sends her apologies. Unfortunately, she's away teaching this week, so Bernard and she have completed their judging work. She has sent in her comments, which I will read on her behalf later on, but she hopes very much to meet some of the poets at some later date, if possible. So the insights and the authority of Bernard and of Alice have provided a wonderful framework for the prize competition. This award ceremony takes place at Wolfson or online each year on the 18th of January, which would have been Jon's birthday. And so this evening we remember him with particular affection, knowing how much he would relish the talented writing that this competition has elicited. So just a few acknowledgements, first of all to Professor Dame Hermione Lee and her successor as president of Wolfson, Sir Tim Hitchens, who is going to speak in a moment. We are very grateful to Professors Simon Armitage, Alice Oswald and Bernard O'Donoghue The English faculty, the faculty board chairs have been extremely useful, and I'd particularly like to thank the English faculty office staff, so Kirsty Logan Fowler and Luke Webster, who are very efficient in helping with all the arrangements for the competition. And I'd like to thank Steve Pearce of Filmshed for providing the technical support. So I'm now going to hand over to Sir Tim Hitchens to come and say a few words about this year's competition.
Welcome everyone to this year's Stallworthy Prize ceremony, celebrating for the 8th year now the best of graduate poetry in Oxford. First thing to say is happy 88th birthday, John. Today would have been Jon Stallworthy's birthday, as you've heard, and it's a good moment to remember his life and personality. In East Asia, some of you may know that the 88th birthday has special significance. It's known as Beiju and is written using the two characters, one of them meaning rice and the other meaning long life. And the character for rice has what looked like 8 strokes on it, hence the 8 and the 8. Well, I'll leave it to the professional poets to offer their judgment on this year's selected poems, all inspired by that theme of disgrace. Poems, as always, take the theme as the starting point and head in so many different directions. And in one poem, disgrace is a woman we're waiting for a date with in a world inhabited by the contents of candy shops and illicit sweetness. Another describes what seems to be a disgraceful midnight phone call, not in the dead of night, but the dead of language. One more is inspired by Lucian Freud, painting a masterpiece to pay off his gambling debts, disgrace producing brilliance, rather like the parade of inspiring poetry before us all tonight. All the poems bring something fresh and new to us and to our imaginations, and as every year, I see something I had never seen before. So thank you for joining us at Wolfson. Thank you in particular to the wonderful range of poets who've submitted their works, and more than ever, we've seen before the number of participants. And I'm delighted to hand back to Julie, who will introduce our poets tonight. Thank you.
Just very briefly, I'm going to invite each of the poets to come and read their poem. We have 5 poets this evening, and we'll invite them to come up in alphabetical order of their surnames. You have their texts in your programme as it is. And so we're going to start with Eliza Browning, followed by Jennifer Kim, followed by Jordan Malley Preuss, followed by Eira Elizabeth Murphy, and finally Paul Norris. So I won't say anything in between their readings. If you'd each like to come up, introduce yourselves in your poem and recite. Thank you. So please, Eliza.
Hi everyone, my name is Eliza Browning and I'm pursuing an MSc in English 1900 to the present at St. Hugh's College, and this is my poem Glen Gould in Toronto. It's about the 20th century Canadian piano player. When you go out, the wind divides itself in two and you go with it. On the streets in winter, there's a neon glow of a 24-hour diner where at 2 or 3 in the morning you order a plate of scrambled eggs. A curtain of snow falling like a doorway to the past. You open it, and there's you, much younger, sitting at a piano, with blank keys like a row of graves. You think they look like sparrows on a wire, or a chessboard whose pieces have not yet been laid. You used to think of childhood as an endless field of possibilities, but now they all seem contained within the white expanse of ivory. You have been thinking, lately, about the emptiness of things. Pill bottles, a bare field, a candle guttering on an altar, and waiting for you, somewhere in the past, a concert stage from which the audience has departed. The moment of anticipation before the first note is struck. You wish you could live in that moment without limits, or the impermeability of absence, how people go on and people don't. Now you think about how to protect yourself. Gloves, heavy overcoat, wool scarf, shielded from the possibility of touch. variations upon variations. When you go out, the wind blows your hair back like childhood again, a dream of the divided field. But you play by holding each note separately, suspended within its own hour, both with and without.
Hello. My name is Jennifer Kim, and I'm an MST student in Exeter College studying art history. Trente et Quarante, after Lucian Freud's The Big Man, 1976, painted to repay his gambling debts. In Monaco, I'm afraid you've lost the Grand Tableau again and fled to our narrow suite above the Tabac. The big man who came brawling upstairs, neck tight in a howling ring, leans now in your weary armchair, waiting to be made whole. Out of the corner in drunk atonement, you pull your tricks. Palette knife, hog bristle, 8 tubes of light fast oil. If you asked, I could tell you how you will make me. Sink his dark suit into the room until every wrinkle struggles away. Burn the impossible mirror white. Suppose his flesh in peach and vermilion, worked up in crests that knuckle under your brush. Last, where the light lands pale and arrogant, mark it. Pitch his forehead in cremnitz, tumble it down his jowls, whirl in opal the moon atop his chin. I am your long apology, your lost lord into the gorgeous. Your expert hand slips varnish over my cadmium skin. Rouge gagne et la couleur, the game, is fixed for you now as you strike out your dew on my angled face. How spare, how silent the room must be to hear the panting of your bristle against linen, every hue belonging to him before I can become myself.
Good evening. I'm Jordan Molly-Preuss. I'm at Merton College as a DPhil student in classics. My area is ancient Greek epic. And I'm going to read the poem Prod, St. Stephen's Day. They had the wit to see what he had meant. So, when they haled him to the bench where he would face his due, they acted justly. We who know the law know who sees hearts. Intent makes traitors. Witnesses can bring the truth to court in different clothes, yet speak its name regardless. He had wreathed himself with shame long since. He did not need to say, "Here proof you've spurned the rock that gave you birth," for us to stone him. And he only used old saws to build his sermon. Trust me, I could best him if I tried. But what I saw still gnaws at me. As he was dying in the dust, that glancing light, my eyes were never flawed.
Hello, I'm Aira Murphy, and I'm doing the Modern Contemporary MST at Mansfield. When I was little, I used to spend almost every summer in the west of Ireland in Mayo, and the house that we stayed in was next to a farm, and my father became known to this farm as the man who cooked and ate a lot of rabbit. I don't actually have a memory of my father skinning a rabbit, but I do have this poem. My father skins the rabbit. My father skins the rabbit with a tenderness I have seen him use for planting sweet peas in coming dusk. Fingertips running numb over stretched skin, breaking open the stubble of an outside. Against this transformation of pink muscle to air, breath into stillness, I catch my reflection in the wideness of its eye, frame myself in dilation and capture.
Hello, my name is Paul Norris. I'm a DPhil student in English at Brasenose College. And My friend suggests an epigraph for this poem by Dorothy Parker, which goes, "This is instead of telephoning because I can't look you in the voice." And I didn't ultimately include that, but I think it sets up the poem quite nicely. This is after the tone. I've shriveled up enough to tap it off with one finger, with turned away eyes, seeing the ring drop, the digit stop flashing. The thing is not done, to ring in the dead of language like this, and to make light of hanging here, suspended mid-drop on your unengaged line, slack across the living room, running this ring around the old haunt, to sound, like the Angelus bell, what is past touch.
Last year, there was a considerable increase in the entries for the prize, open to graduate students of the university, when the number more than doubled. And it's gratified that the number has increased still further this year, when there were over 90 entries. The given topic, as you've heard, was disgrace, a subject that we settled on partly because of the openness and divisibility of the word, containing the idea of grace, as well as a negativing prefix, which we felt builds in an inviting contradiction. And some of the most interesting entries did play on this promising complexity. We wondered too if there might be a substantial number of submissions on political themes, since disgrace is a familiar charge in the evaluation of public life. As it turned out, there weren't many simply moralizing public poems. A few entries which dwelt on Ukraine were compelling, but found it hard to get beyond the purely circumstantial. It is, of course, one of the great poetic aesthetic questions. A generation ago, the doubtful compound poethics was coined to address the conflicting ideas of poetry and its duties to be poetic or ethical. Strong views were expressed on both sides, whether poetry was its own realm with its own laws, or answerable to the moral world. It's a question that arises interestingly with the writings of Jon Stallworthy. He was a gifted Keatsian lyric poet, but also an important scholarly commentator on war poetry, particularly the life and works of Wilfred Owen. Not that the submitter of an entry for a poetry competition has to respond explicitly to the writer in whose name the prize was founded. The T.S. Eliot Prize is not awarded for resemblance to the wasteland, even in its centenary year in 2022. Indeed, the attempt to replicate its effects have not in general been thought a good idea. Everyone is anxious about influence, but if there is to be an influence, Jon Stallworthy is a good model, not least for the writer who believes in giving evidence that, in Leavis's phrase, we have lived in our time. Given the large number of entries and the openness of the subject, which could be applied to so many things, private and public, it was difficult to narrow down to 5. A further variant is length. Since the only constraint is a maximum length of 40 lines, we were judging poems, as you have heard, which exploited the full length against pieces less than 10 lines long. Another consideration was the extent to which a poem should be hidebound by the given theme. Inevitably, there were cases where a poem was repurposed for the set topic. Often, these were understandably the better poems. If you have a good poem you want to enter for a competition, it's frustrating to be prohibited from submitting by procrastinating attention to the subject. Sometimes the occurrence of the word disgrace or its derivatives gave the game away. And I wondered at some points if more concrete objects make better subjects than abstraction. Daffodils better than immortality, for instance. However, in the end, we wouldn't want to change much. It's a pleasure and a privilege to read these poems by talented and committed young people, and to read them with Alice Oswald, one of the most gifted poets of our time, has for me been a particular privilege these past 4 years. And I now hand over to Julie to read Alice's report.
So these are Professor Alice Oswald's comments on this year's competition. The long love that in my heart doth harbour into my face presseth with bold pretense. Thomas Wyatt, who wrote those lines, is one of the best at blushing in verse. His sonnets seem to be designed both to keep secrets and declare them. John Clare is another who whispers into poems, like Midas whispering into reeds. I am, yet what I am none cares or knows. I am the self-consumer of my woes. I love those poems because their language gets the better of their shyness, and I was listening out for similar contradictions while judging this competition. Yes, in spite of asking for poems on disgrace, I was thinking what a grace it invariably is to be given a poem to read. It means that the world is an extravagant place in which humans not only eat and drink and sleep, but also sing. This year, it was an extra grace, a grace with grace notes, that 91 poems were submitted. We are grateful for all of them, but have singled out 5 for special praise. Prod, by Georgian Mali-Preuss, uses a sonnet pattern to contain the memory of something which still gnaws at me. After the Tone, by Paul Norris, is a short poem lengthened by double meanings, acutely aware of how to bend a phrase across a line to make it spring open. Another short poem, by Aira Elizabeth Murphy, catches the poet on the CCTV of a flayed rabbit's eye. Somehow that image of a skin pulled off and the victim still watching is, to me, exactly what disgrace feels like. Glenn Gould in Toronto by Eliza Browning is a poem of couplets, which looks like a row of piano keys on the page. Perhaps it's not obvious how the poem relates to disgrace, but its final couplet is particularly beautiful. And 30 et 40, after Lucian Freud's The Big Man painted to repay his gambling debts, is a strange poem spoken by a painting. This piece twangs with the kind of tensions I mentioned at the beginning. There is the painter's embarrassment, and yet also his skill. The sitter's predatory power, and yet also his weakness under the paintbrush. The portrait, ultimately the most whole, but throughout the poem, the least powerful. Jennifer Kim wrote this poem, and we'd like to give it first prize. The runner-up nomination goes to After the Tone by Paul Norris. Congratulations from Alice Oswald to you both. And she adds, and since this is my last year of judging the Stallworthy Prize, I'd like to thank Julie, Curtis and Wolfson College for inviting me to take part, Kirsty Logan Fowler and Luke Webster at the English faculty for collating and sending the poems, and Bernard O'Donoghue for being a wonderful co-judge and colleague. And thank you, of course, to all the poets for sending in poems without which none of us be here. So I'd like to ask Bernard and Jennifer to come up so Bernard can present Jennifer with her certificate. We will then ask Jennifer to read again. And I will just round up with a word or two at the very end.
Congratulations. It's a wonderful poem.
Trente et 40, after Lucian Freud's The Big Man, 1976, painted to repay his gambling debts. In Monaco, I'm afraid you've lost the grand tableau again and fled to our narrow suite above the Tabac. The big man who came brawling upstairs, neck tight in a howling ring, leans now in your weary armchair, waiting to be made whole. Out of the corner, in drunk atonement, you pull your tricks. Palette knife, hog bristle, 8 tubes of light fast oil. If you asked, I could tell you how you will make me, sink his dark suit into the room until every wrinkle struggles away. Burn the impossible mirror white. Suppose his flesh in peach and vermilion worked up in crests that knuckle under your brush. Last, where the light lands pale and arrogant, mark it. Pitch his forehead in cremnits, tumble it down his jowls, whirl in opal, the moon atop his chin. I am your long apology, your loss lured into the gorgeous. Your expert hand slips varnish over my cadmium skin, rouge gagne et la couleur. The game is fixed for you now as you strike out your dew on my angled face. How spare, how silent the room must be to hear the panting of your bristle against linen, every hue belonging to him, before I can become myself. Thank you.
So finally, thank you, Jennifer, for that fabulous piece of writing. And thank you to all our shortlisted poets for sharing their work with us on the theme of disgrace. As we know, it maybe goes back all the way to Shakespeare's Sonnet 29 and carries forward to Carol Ann Duffy's wonderful evocation of moments of grace and also the loss of love in her poem about disgrace. This body of work that you have all created creates a wonderful development of that theme of disgrace across so many centuries. So there's nothing more to say really, except to thank everybody for coming along today. If the bottles of wine have been produced, we invite you to come to the cafe and have a glass with the poets, speak to them, speak to Bernard about the work and about the competition. And we look forward to seeing you again next year for an even larger competition with new themes. So thank you very much from Wolfson College to all of you. Thank you. Good night.